Today we're going to focus on how to extend process automation across the Sharepoint Enterprise and across other line of business systems, frankly, using Nintex. So just a little bit about ourselves. We've been working within the Sharepoint ecosystem for probably going on about 15 years now. And with that, we've won a number of awards. We've been a gold partner forever. We work with Microsoft's Enterprise Group here in New York, and a number of other kudos and awards, as well as a number of awards from Nintex. We work with a wide variety of customers, and being in New York alone, you end up working with a lot of professional services, and we have particular focus on the AEC and now pharma. So just to do a quick recap and just a sort of overarching entry point, we've been discussing how to modernize the enterprise for quite some time. And what we've meant by the modernization of the enterprise is essentially as you go to SharePoint 2016 and into the cloud, a lot of the customizations that you previously have built on premise, WSPs and the like, just don't scale. They just don't work. And so with it, there are a number of approaches by which one can make that move, prepare for that move as you modernize the enterprise. So applications in Office 365, there's the new SharePoint App Model. Now, what this means is, and I've referred to this before as what's old is new again, the SharePoint App Model is really API driven, and it's now where you build discrete applications or use off-the-shelf toolkits like Nintex to create modern solutions that work both on and off-premise and that will scale with you for the foreseeable future. This approach to using Nintex or building modern apps allows you to really satisfy what we call the retail effect, to focus on end-user experience. It moves capital expenditures to line items. It easily scales. And more importantly, it really supports this agile model of development, which we touched on the last go around, to allow you to quickly satisfy, manage to budget, and deliver solutions to the enterprise. So the old, just as a recap, traditionally you had monolithic solutions. They were one-off server-side code. There was this prolonged release of solution to the business. And this was largely driven by waterfall as well, which is fraught with its own challenges. And with the monolithic approach, there was a high degree of reliance upon IT, service disruptions during upgrades, and then the inevitable, how do you move from one platform to the other without risk and peril? And so now the app solution, there are no farm deployed, there's no solutions directly deployed to the farm. And the application value increases over time in reuse, and that's what we're going to focus on particularly today. With this marriage of applications to your SharePoint environment, you get to focus on the user experience. The solutions themselves require minimal IT involvement, no downtime to deploy because you're not affecting your farm level solution. And also, for those of you who are on the IT and development side, you're not limited to versions of .NET or any technology for that matter. If you want to use Angular and JSON, all this stuff is available for those of you who are going to create some homegrown apps. And we have expertise in helping our customers with that journey as well. And with it, you get rapid build and deploy. And so you need to modernize and automate processes. There's an enormous amount of ROI we can share with you as to what intelligent process automation means. And with this modernization, how you can drive efficiency, accuracy, built for the cloud, will work on-prem, scalable, and reduces risk. And again, just to beat it to death, but legacy systems and WSPs just do not work in the cloud. And so why to automate with Nintex? So the second part of our series that we had a month or so ago was the importance of Agile. So you have a choice. You can build your own apps, or you can use a modern tool set like Nintex to intelligently automate processes, where now you have one tool by which you can automate a variety of processes. You can bring together and drive together, you see these infographics at the bottom, a host of platforms, Salesforce, outside the ecosystem of Microsoft, etc. And you get to rapidly build and deploy. And change management is absolutely much easier to manage. And this seamless connection to cloud systems means you also get to reuse existing IP and investment that you have inside the enterprise that you can repurpose, bring together, and create much more coherent, meaningful, satisfying solutions for your end users. So with Nintex, one solution for all departments, and that's what we're going to focus on again today, is once you've built a solution of type using Nintex, how can you take chunks of it in terms of workflow actions and snippets that you've developed and bring it for use to a whole bunch of stuff? Our first webcast in this series was around contract lifecycle management. Those of you who joined today, we'll send you links to all these webcasts that add up to today. But these are just a short sampling of use cases that you can satisfy using Nintex. And again, repurpose a lot of the IP that you develop for your departments. So in our first cast, we talked about a CLM. And so here, contract lifecycle management, which means different things to different people. A solution has to be geared toward the end user. And so in our first webcast, we talked about how you can build a coherent end-user satisfying contract lifecycle management where people in sales stay in Salesforce. People who are in legal, they get notifications. You can distribute. You can wire it up to DocuSign. And then create rich reporting as it relates to where those contracts are with Nintex Hawkeye. And so around CLM automation, some of the highlights that we brought out was that you lose revenue by missing renewals and having contracts and the like that are either inaccurate or haven't had a thorough review process. And the automation of the creation of these contracts goes a long way to make sure that your team can focus on what they do well and not have to worry about error of end user input, best laid plans of mice and men. With the CLM automation that we represented in that first cast, you have improved visibility into the contract status, when it expires, renew it, how to dispose of it. And there's a common process for contract approval and sign-off. And contract approval and sign-off, again, in this case with CLM, is something that's common, be it an HR contract or whatever else, the leveraging of DocuSign for signature. And this is some of what we'll discuss again shortly. So these benefits around CLM, you do have choices. You can go for off the shelf, but now you're just adding one more layer, one more silo, one more thing to maintain, rather than leveraging what you have and taking advantage of Office 365 and SharePoint, Outlook, and Microsoft Office in general. And this reuse of functional modules across the organization for related corporate processes. And I promise we'll get to that very shortly. As I mentioned previously, waterfall was the rule. You build monolithic solutions. But the problem with that is, in the pursuit of perfection and trying to understand everything up front, it is very difficult to guarantee a minimally viable product to get to your end users on time and on budget. And while it sounds easier said than done, we've had a great deal of success using the Agile approach to roll out successful solutions to our clients. And with Agile, you get constant end user feedback. It doesn't matter how well it's built if your end users can't figure out how to use it. And this is a flexible, lower risk, faster time to value approach. So plan, build, review, plan, build, review. Set those goal lines for minimally viable product. Have a wish list for your backlog, and you get absolutely great success. And one of the reasons why we're ardent supporters of Nintex and partners with them is that Nintex itself does an incredibly good job of doing risk mitigation against this Agile process. So, why process automation? People want immediate delivery. This is the SaaS or retail effect we talk about. Flexibility and change management and business involvement. Keeping your end users absolutely involved all the way through, so that when you finally release something to your end user community, to your customers, they're satisfied. They were involved in that entire process. So today's demonstration pivots off of the last two webcasts we did. Building a CLM, modernizing the enterprise, the choices you have therein, how to approach projects with Agile, the advantages that Nintex brings to Agile development. And today we're wrapping it up, if we will, about the reusability of that IP. You know what your end users wanted off the first project. You identified and built and automated standard processes that have a great deal of reuse within the enterprise itself. So we had it very quickly up on the screen, and again, we'll distribute this, but how do you take components of, say, that CLM workflow and reuse them? So CLM components, what were the components? We had process initiation. How do you start that process? Development of those forms, creating a document, generating it automatically, taking content that exists within clause libraries, within information in Salesforce, route and approve, system integration to those other line of business systems, CRM, etc. Digital signature, which is everywhere and persistent and has wide applicability throughout the organization, alerting and reporting. And all of these elements were represented in that CLM solution that we had shown and discussed. And so today, Simon, if you would take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just going back to that slide previously, each of those areas are components that you'll see in every single solution, right? We're talking about CLM, and these black boxes with activities underneath them are all things that we saw in the CLM demo, and you're going to get links to that after this webcast. But process initiation, right? There's always something, and even if you're not using Nintex today, you're going to be initiating processes probably through an Excel sheet that you need to fill out, or a paper-based form, or something in Word, or PowerPoint, or Excel, or PDF that you have to email to someone in the business, and so on and so on. Document generation, well, I've just described it, really. You're filling out information into a thing that someone will need to review and approve. From a CLM perspective, document generation is spitting out standard documents like NDAs and things, pulling information from a line of business system. But as we'll see in the demonstration today, we can do that kind of thing in lots of other different processes. Repurpose that same bit of internal IP that's been created and then reuse it across different processes. Internal approval routing, you know, every process will have an approver or a set of approvers, pretty much. In CLM, we're going through legal, pricing review, and various things like that. In our example, we're going to pick up some of those standard approval processes that happen in the business, and we'll completely rethink how we use them into a completely different process. Alerting, letting people know something's due, letting people know something's arriving, a task is due, a digital signature is required. Digital signatures, as Joe said, reaches across every single part of process in a business, be it health and safety review, IT audits of systems, you know, internal inspections of equipment, contracts, new hires, you know, the list is endless. And then system integration. So we'll look at this in the demo in a sec, but the CRM we were using to kick off our CLM demonstration was a Microsoft CRM, but it doesn't have to be. And every organization has multiple systems. The beauty of being able to reuse these components across multiple systems is that you can create that snippet or piece of IP once. It can be controlled by IT, but it can be reused by the business in other processes. So a really good example would be updating an HR system, right? If there was a snippet that we could use and reuse across the business outside of CLM and other processes to update an HR system, and that piece of technology was created and managed by IT. That means that that system will be updated as the business requires, as HR requires, managed by IT, so governance is in place. But the business doesn't need to get in contact with IT every time they want to build a process that does something like that. Now, clearly, you have to have controls. But if we take our CLM boxes here, 6 sort of areas of functionality, and now look at all these items across the business, like expense reports, sales proposals, contract negotiation, invoice processing, they all use elements of this. And I'm going to show you this live today. If we can have the next slide, please. Okay. So the area we're going to focus on is sales. Here's some example of sales processes that you might see in many organizations. Obviously, we're going to have contract management. It's an element of sales. I'm not going to cover that. That's what CLM was doing. But we're going to look more specifically around things like sales proposals, sending out proposals to end customers, getting internal approvals for proposals and that kind of thing. I'll talk you through the process shortly as we jump into the demo, but each of the areas of the process, we're going to reuse those same components from CLM. Slightly different configuration, potentially, slightly different inputs and outputs, but it's the same stuff. And I'm hoping by the end of the demo, you'll get an idea that if you approach automating your sort of work life using Nintex in a very much thinking not just about the process you're trying to deliver today, but about the plan out the way you deliver these processes in a very modular way, which means when the business next asks you to, let's take another example here, do something around opportunity management, chances are you'll have 60, 80% of the process already built because you've already automated discount approvals and you've already automated contract renewal, for example. All right, enough talking. Let's do some demo. All right, so I'm going to talk you through really quick what happened in CLM. We're going to look at some of the components. I'll talk about the process, and then we're going to start to dig into those bits of components, look at how they're put together, and then we're going to completely change it on its head and create a sales-based process completely unrelated to contracts and contract lifecycle, but reuse the same assets. By the end of it, I'm hoping you're itching to get your hands on Nintex and start playing around with component workflows and thinking about how you can build reusability across your business. So this is the CLM solution. Very nice solution. Lots of information that legal teams and sales teams and contract management teams need to be able to see, information at their fingertips about what's going on within the world of contracts within an organization, just not on an individual basis, but right across the whole piece. So in the webinar the last 2 times ago around CLM, we showed you how we can generate contracts in an automated way by allowing people to work in the tools that they're used to. So scenario here is that someone's working in sales on an opportunity and they get to the point where they're talking to a customer where they need to create something like an NDA or some standardized document. They simply tick in Dynamics 365 to say NDA required, yes, no, to get a yes. Nintex picks that up and it starts to go through the process of pulling out the pertinent information from the op and sticking it in a standard NDA document, and then routing it through legal and potentially pricing or other departments to get it reviewed, rubber stamped, so that it's able to be sent out to the end customer. As part of that process, there are those stages we saw in the slide deck, right? So there's an initiation process, be it a form, be it an activity in another line of business system. There is creating a document, routing it through for legal approval or sales approval, sending it out to DocuSign or a digital signature platform for the customer to review and sign there and then, rather than having to print that signature. And these are the blocks we're going to look at reusing for our sales-based process, which is focused very much on other areas of sales. So we jump into contract records as one of the pieces of functionality that sits within CLM. This is an example of a record that's been created when someone has created something, a tick box in an opportunity in Dynamics 365 to say, hey, I need an NDA for, who's the account? Executive Towers, right? And it kicks off and a process starts. The end goal of that tick and the process is we end up with a contract in our contract library with all the right metadata associated, including things like the opportunity name, the renewal date, who owns that opportunity, total contract value, and there's a ton of other metadata behind this view that we're not showing you because it'll give you a headache. But the end goal is we end up with a signed contract and we know when that's starting, we know when it's finishing, we can get alerted when it's coming up for renewal, and we can save the relevant records and link them back to Dynamics 365, for example. So that's quite a linear process, and it's a specific process. In fact, if we look at that process, let's do it, what we'll see is that it's very much tailored to taking data in a document through that journey right across the organization. You can see we've got links in here to Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM, and this process is designed specifically for that purpose. But the bit I really want to draw your attention to, I'll just scroll down to the bottom. There you go. I'll zoom in a little bit to give you a bit of a chance. Where's it gone? Zoom in too far. Here we go. With all those activities and logic and branching and sign-offs and so on, there's a couple of tiny little actions that are doing some really nifty stuff. In fact, it's just one really unassuming action here, which I've named Start Legal Approval. And if I just type here on the actions on the left, actually the action is called Run Component Workflow. Now in our CLM demonstration and solution, we're starting a snippet, a sub-process, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it a governed process, something that IT and HR and legal and other people can have an input on. And it's a completely separate piece of process automation. The logic is all there about how we want to start getting legal approval for content within the business. We may have another snippet that's around how do we request legal support, right? And legal department can be consulted, can sit down with the legal department and work out what's the right process for approaching you? How do you want to track these requests coming in? What sort of information do you need? And so on and so on. Now in our CLM example, we're simply dragging this component workflow in. We're selecting the right reusable process, and then we're giving it some inputs and outputs, and we're away to the races. So each of those things that we saw on the slide just before we started the demo around process initiation, digital signature, approvals inside the business, this is what these component workflows can do. I'm just going to remove that because I don't want to mess up CLM. Let's just go over to look at some existing reusable workflows that we've got within the organization. There's that legal approval that we just saw. We've also got a sales approval here, and we've got a document e-signature process as well. Let's dig into that because we're going to use that for our demo today. The process of sending a document for digital signature to a customer or a group of people in a specific order hasn't really changed very much. If you're doing it with email and you're sending a document for someone to review and for them to print out, wet signature, scan, reattach, reply to the email, that process is much the same across whatever it is that you're signing. Introducing digital signatures means that you can do that much quicker. There's no need for hardware to print things. You can do it on the go on a mobile device. So in terms of an organization standardizing the way that it sends content out for digital signature is actually very easy. In our example, we're using DocuSign. And this is a component workflow. We're doing various things like sending it for signature, we're waiting for a response, we're downloading the document. The thing that makes this component workflow very different from a standard Nintex workflow is we've thought ahead. Okay, so we created as a workflow that can be accessed by all the people that need to be able to access it and use it in their other processes. We've done a few things that are slightly different. First thing we've done is, and if anyone of you are used to using workflow tools in SharePoint, like Nintex or SharePoint designer workflows, you'll be used to the concept of variables. Variables are things where you can store data for the lifetime of a workflow running, and it's a very useful way of storing data from other line of business systems that you then use elsewhere. But component workflows have an extra set of tick boxes that make it a component workflow. So you can see here we've got bits of information that we require initiation, things like document URL, the customer name, the contact email, the document name. There's various bits of information this component workflow needs in order to start and run effectively. And there's also some outputs as well. So we're looking at a context of a digital signature. So what we need to do is we need to know where to send it. So what's their name? What's their email address? What is the document we want them to sign? And then we also want, out of the end of it, we want the outcome of that signature, be it they signed it, they declined it, or it's still in progress and we're waiting. And we also want that signed document because we want to do something with it. In CLM, it was going through a legal approval, pricing review, and then it was getting sent out to the end customer. In our example, we're going to be using it in a slightly different way, but the end result of inputs and outputs is exactly the same. The other nice thing about component workflows, and this is what it looks like when you create one, is that you can not only allow it to be called from other Nintex workflows, but you can allow it to be called from other endpoints too, using an HTTPS API endpoint, which is a load of garb for saying anyone on the call that has a system that maybe doesn't naturally have an integration with Nintex, it doesn't matter. If there's a process within that line of business system where you want to call this component workflow to send content for digital signature, you can. So it's not just bound by Nintex. You can start to use these things from outside your organization. Right, so look, here's our scenario 2. So we talked about what happened with CLM. Someone requesting legal support to review an NDA for a customer or something similar, or a supplier. In our scenario, we're going to start in a very different place. We're going to start in Salesforce. So let me talk you through the scenario. Sales and pre-sales people in our fictitious organization, Hammertech, let's say, they use Salesforce, and there's lots of elements that the salespeople need support with as part of nurturing a lead to an opportunity and to close. A lot of the components and the things they need to do are the same as the CLM example, but here we're in Salesforce and we're going to start a sales request process. Joe mentioned earlier how Nintex integrates with lots of different line of business systems, including Salesforce, and here's a great example. So we've got a form here. It's an Nintex form embedded in Salesforce as an object on the page so that people in sales can request various resources, right? So we could request a pre-sales resource. You know, I need them to have specific, information. Let's say they need to be able to speak French. God forbid anyone tries to sell to people in France unless they speak French. Good luck with that. Discount approvals, proposal sign-off, and send client proposal. That's the area we're going to focus on today. So we're allowing people to work in a tool that they're comfortable with. Salespeople working in Salesforce, it's a perfectly comfortable place for them to work. But what we want to do is start to reuse those components that we use for CLM for a completely different process. So I created this form. It took about maybe half an hour because I tried to make it look a little pretty for the webinar, and it published out to Salesforce. We've got another site here. It's a SharePoint site. And this is where we're storing sales requests, documents that are kind of draft and in flight and so on and so on. So it's a place for salespeople and approvers to work on sales requests right across the business. And so we have a list. We've got some basic information about it, customer name, contact name, and what's the type of request that's coming in, and various other fields that we're going to use. And what we want to do on here is create a process to handle those sales requests that come out of Salesforce into this kind of sales collaboration working space. But we want to reuse all those components from CLM so we don't have to build it from fresh. So what I'll do is click over to this tab here, and you can see I've got an existing process that I set up for the webinar so that you didn't have to see me create the very basic foundations of a process. It's not huge though, we've got 8 actions, so I've not gone to town. Let's click into that and open the process, and let's start to take that input from Salesforce and all of those lovely components that we use for the CLM demo. Now let's start using it for a completely different process in sales. While that's doing that, let's just look at one other element of component workflows. I talked a little bit earlier about endpoints and Nintex being able to call them other line of business systems too. If I just republish this and publish, take about maybe 10, 20 seconds. And what we'll do is we'll get the pop-up from the component workflow to show you the way in which you can integrate and interact with that component workflow. From a Nintex perspective, there's no configuration needed. You can simply select it from that run component workflow activity. But from an external system, it gives you a really nice endpoint that you can then call into, which means you can start that process from another line of business system. So here we go. So anyone that's got any sort of development background will recognize some of the things here on screen. There's a URL that we can call, and one with a token that we can call from another system to start something. And with giving you the body of information needs to be passed. These are those variables, right? These are these things that we said we had to have for this workflow to run. Given this is digital signature, we can say, well, look, we need the customer name, we need the contact name, their email, and we need the URL of the doc that needs to be signed. But this is just to show it's not exclusively something that's used in Nintex. You could use it from an external system as well. So all you devs, get your hats on, thinking caps on, and think about how this might transform the way that you deliver some of this functionality in the business. All right, so this is our sales request workflow. You can see it's very skeletal for good reason. I wanted to show how quick it is and easy it is to create this stuff. So we start the process here at green. We're logging something to the audit log. We're adding a status to it so that we can quickly get from that lovely sales request lists into what's actually going on behind the process and what stage are we at. And then we've got something called a state machine. I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but when you're drawing out a process with a customer, or an internal customer, external customer, state machines are incredibly powerful. You simply drag on a state machine, you get 2 branches, and then you start to type out your process. Anyone that's ever used swim lanes to deliver project management sort of stuff, project process stuff, this is exactly the same thing. So we could have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. The nice thing about this is you can loop back to different stages and in effect create an endless workflow, well not endless, but a long-running workflow, which is traditionally how processes work in the business anyway. Someone sends someone an email, someone replies with changes and a suggestion, and and it goes around the business and goes around and around. I've already done some of the work for us here. So these are my stages for a sales process. We have a sales manager approval, we have a legal approval, probably not for every sales request, but there may be cases where we need it. We send something to a customer, we update Salesforce, and we mark the solution or the process as complete. And we've also set that the first state is the sales manager approval. If you think about a salesperson requesting something from someone, chances are the sales manager will need to approve something. We also have a branch for with initiator, and this is basically in case the sales manager goes no way and sends that activity back to the person that asked for it in the first place. So that's our structure. What I want to do is reuse the stuff from CLM for a completely different process. So let's just do a quick search on actions and run component workflow. Let's drag in, run component workflow, and I'm going to say run sales manager process. Double click, in we go. And here I can pull from that same list of component workflows. So let's choose the sales approval. It's going to go away and look at that process. It's going to tell me what inputs I need to give, what outputs I'm going to get, and I can simply configure them. So other options here, I can do things like wait for the component to finish, or I could run both at once. Run both at once is quite handy for, okay, I want to update an HR system with this information partway through a process, but I don't want to wait for it to happen, so let's just keep moving. Obviously, in approval process, you want to wait for that. But again, anyone that's used Nintex will recognize this kind of configuration. It's asking for an approver's name. I can simply select something from the list that's available to us and add that in and configure that up, and away we go. Let's drag another one in to our send to customer branch. And again, I get my same list, and here's that DocuSign e-signature standard workflow. And these are the inputs that we saw when we were looking at the component workflow itself. And I want to actually configure this up live because I want to run a final demo of this to show you that how quick and easy it is to reuse these components. So as you'd expect, we've got inputs that make sense for a digital signature. So I want to add a document URL. So let's add the attachment URL. I want to add the customer name to customer name. I want to add the customer email to the customer email. Customer contact to the contact name. And I've got some outputs, which is cool. So the things I want to know is what's the URL of the signed doc and what's the message that comes back from that component workflow. And that's most often going to be, yeah, this person signed the document and these are the comments they made. Or this person rejected the document and the signed document URL is blank because they didn't sign it. So I want to wait for this component workflow to finish before I do anything because that makes sense in the context of my process. So let's just save that. Let's give it a better name. Nintex can't help with your typing. Quick heads up. And we're good. So I want that to wait until the process is done because then it will move to the next state, which is update Salesforce. I pre-configured that. You don't want to see me floundering around putting in my Salesforce credentials or whatever it is I needed to do that. But there we go. We've reused two of those components from CLM. I haven't actually configured that one, so let's just delete that. We'll just keep it simple for now, and we'll just do this e-signature process. The other thing I want to do is let's make sure it goes to that branch first. Again, this is just for demo purposes, but I want to have that to be the first branch. So our workflow will come into here. It's going to go down that send to customer branch, and it's going to be the e-signature. So let's publish that out. Away we go. Let's flip over to Salesforce. Okay, let's see if it works. So I'm in opportunity, I'm a salesperson, I want to make a sales request. I click on my sales request tab in Salesforce. That's going to bring up the available processes that I can start here from Salesforce. I want to make a sales request. It's going to load that start form. Again, here's an initiation form, right? It's very different from a tick in the box to say I want an NDA. It's a completely different process. I want to send a client a proposal. So here's some information. Now, these fields will look familiar, right? First name, last name, email address. We're going to pull other information like who's the customer and so on from Salesforce, as you'd expect. Let's just put in some details. Simon Wright. Simon Typed it right. Good start. Pick a doc. Just any old doc for now. Nice thing about having processes in Salesforce and other line of business systems is you can do funky stuff to save people time. So I could add this person as a contact to Salesforce if they weren't already there, but I wouldn't. And then let's submit. So that's going to take that document, going to take that request, and it's going to start the right bit of process. It's going to create a sales request in that SharePoint sort of collaboration working space, and we're off. Now we do have to give that maybe 30 seconds or so to start. Yeah, we're doing a little bit even. Let's just take another look at component workflows. So another place I've seen component workflows used an awful lot is where line of business systems don't really like integrating other things, or specifically where business units within the organization don't really like to allow other people access to their system. And a really good example is SAP. Component workflows are a great alternative to saying to the SAP team, do you know what, we're going to do invoice processing in SharePoint now, and then we'll just update your system. The advantage of using component workflows like this and having endpoints that you can call into is that you can now say, actually, here's a process we've all agreed on for digital signatures. Why not? Why don't you let your processes in SAP start this? So we're not going to control or change your process. You do that yourself. So that's another area of use where these endpoints can be really handy. Right, I've just heard a ping in my ear, which means something's happened. So let's just have a quick look what's going on here. Let's look what's going on here. Just refresh. So I think I'll find, yeah, there we go. We've got a new sales request. It's come in. It's pulled information from Salesforce that we didn't key into the form, like who the contact is and the contract, the request type, information about that request type. We've done some funky stuff in Salesforce. We put a note on there to say I've sent the contract to the proposal. So the customer have also attached that draft proposal here as well. Our workflow started, and I should have got, yes I have, an email's just come in. Here it is. Review and sign number 10 proposal. This has come in from DocuSign. Please review and sign a recent proposal. Yep, why not? Let's click on that and have a little look-see. Slightly weird that I'm sending out to a customer a cinema price list, but hey, each to their own. So let's sign up. Let's put the date signed. We'll finish. No thanks. Nope, already got DocuSign, thanks very much. So that's that done. Now remember that component workflow, right? We gave it the inputs, they came from Salesforce and a form, and now we're waiting for the outputs. We've seen the meat of it, right? We sent it out to a customer, they've viewed it, they've signed it, blah, blah, blah. But now the outputs are, well, I need the URL of that signed document and the outcome because I want to do things with it. And if I refresh this now, here we go. So I've now got summary PDF, which if I click on that, it's going to download it because that's just how Salesforce works. And we open that up. So this is a DocuSign secured certificate of completion, right? This is about my signature just now around that cinema PDF. But you can see the time and date I did it. You can see it's attached to the Salesforce record. There should also be, here we go, the actual signed document too. So let's just open that and have a look just to show there's no smoke and mirrors. There it is, signature, date, time, done. So component workflows. Don't just sit down and work out a process for one. the logic for one process, sit down and work out if there's commonality across many. Create your component workflows and quickly take something that was used in a CLM, 2 months ago on a webinar, and suddenly turn it into a sales automation and streamlining process for sharing stuff with customers, quote approvals internally, and so on and so on. That ends the demo.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. And we do want to bring up one other component real quickly. This is our modernization assessment. Joe, if you want to go through it.
Yes. So we have done, for a number of our enterprise clients, an assessment which has been beneficial to both the client and obviously ourselves, where we go in, we do, it's essentially high level, but cataloging what legacy systems and processes are in place. You'd be surprised what people don't know they have until you get an outside set of eyes to look at it. And with it, a proposed conversion path, be it Nintex or build your own. And off of that assessment, we produce an estimate of what it will cost to transform these things. Our estimates are inclusive of internal and external effort. They're agnostic of our involvement, if you will. And then for those clients that do proceed after our assessment to work with us, we have an Agile solution methodology that has been highly successful, and in many cases, in most cases, frankly, see Nintex come to bear to help drive that Agile process. So this is a call to action, as they would say within sales parlance, but we wanted to make you aware of that. And finally, for those of our clients who are in the enterprise and have access to Microsoft funding, our firm does qualify for a variety of Microsoft programs for funding. We've done these assessments without essentially hitting the wallet of our clients through Microsoft's sponsorship. There's something in it for everybody, and wanted to make you aware of that. So, we'd be remiss not to call that out, but with it, we'd like to turn over to questions and answers. And thank you, everybody. Please fill out the survey. We'll send you today's webcast as well as links to the additional webcast, so you can see the full trio of messaging around CLM, use of Agile, and then its reapplication to other business units. We always appreciate everybody's time. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch, and talk to you soon. Take care.